you. Thank you all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about social housing in Vienna. Social housing in Vienna is a very, let's say, important topic in the public discussions in Vienna. Not only because the housing crisis is a global one, but also because social housing has a long history in the city policy of Vienna. As you might know, Vienna is the capital of Austria, and it is a densely built European city. You can see the aerial view now from the city core, from the city center. This is a very, can you see my mouse, by the way?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
Great. You see the medieval city core. You see an extension from the 19th century in a former defense area, which I will talk about later, and a very dense urban structure, the consolidated city that is mostly built in the 18th and 19th century. So the actual buildings are from that time. The history of the city, of course, it's much older and starts with the Roman fortification of the limes, the defense wall of the Roman Empire against the barbarians from the north. These Roman camps always had the same layout, and they are still somehow visible in the urban structure, in the morphology of the city of Vienna. And also what we can see even in this urban structure is the force of the water of the Danube River that damaged even the Roman fortification 2000 years ago. So it's really an important element of the urban structure in Vienna is the river, the Danube River. In the medieval time, Vienna was not that important. It was a city among others. It was the capital of a small empire among many, many others in Europe. Europe at that time was divided into a lot of small kingdoms. And Vienna was the capital of one of them, although they already started to build a huge cathedral, a Catholic cathedral at that time. The city itself was fortified. It was strongly related to the Danube River, but it was a dense but only small European city. In 16th, 17th, and 18th century, the city started growing. And as you can see in this drawing, the city jumped over its fortification and occupied and started to occupy the land around. Small villages became parts of the city, and a second fortification has been built to somehow defend the city. Nowadays, this central part of the city, just to give you an overview a little bit about the city and an impression how it looks like, nowadays the city center, which was the medieval and the city core at that time, is a very, let's say, attractive place for international tourism. There are a lot of museums, the old palaces, but also a lot of administrative buildings for the Republic of Austria. So to have a small walk around, we see from a pedestrian point of view in one of the first pedestrian zones of Austria, the cathedral. It's permanently under construction. One of the main streets, a former, let's say, a former fortification of the Roman castle, which has been located on the right side in this picture 2000 years ago, but still the street follows this old fortification and is the Graben, one of the most important shopping streets in Vienna. The entrance gate to the emperor's palace, the Habsburg Empire, as you might know, ruled big parts of Europe in the last 600 years. and small markets and nearly medieval environments also appear in the structure of the city. A big change happened in the 19th century when the fortification has been broken down and a huge area around the kernel of the city, around the city center, has been totally restructured by a very representative boulevard, the Ringstraße, which hosts also the university, the parliament, the opera, the theater, the main theater, the city council of Vienna, the opera. So many public buildings, many representative buildings have been located along this new boulevard in the 19th century. This is a view from the period of time when it was under construction. You see the small trees. Nowadays they are of course huge, and the appearance of the situation is very different. On the left side you see the parliament, in the background the city council, and in the background here that's the university building and the theater of this state. Another view from above some decades later. But the city of Vienna is not only a densely built up area, it also contains a lot of green space. About 50% of the surface of the city boundaries is within the city boundaries is green space. It has vineyards, it has forests, and it has also a quite massive amount of agriculturally used land to feed the city. So it's in this, let's say, in vegetables and salad and these kind of things, Wien is sufficient for it. So you heard that this city is an old city, and this city also had very difficult periods. I will talk about that later. But why now jumping to St. Louis, and why jumping to Pruitt-Igoe, the first radical demolition of modernist buildings in the 20th century? Because this time, the 70s, the 80s, this was the beginning of an immense change in the policy of how to deal with the old constructions and the old structures within the city of Vienna. What you see here is a small Baroque district, very close to the city center of Vienna, and it has been in a really bad condition. A lot of prostitution happened there, drug dealing, homeless people found shelter there. There was no infrastructure, no running water, no electricity. Most of the buildings have been closed, locked. Some even had to be protected against collapsing. And the idea was that this district should be destroyed and replaced by a modernist social housing project that provides green space and parking and sunny balconies and bathrooms, and so all the facilities and infrastructures that a modern city at that time should provide to its inhabitants. But a group of young architects and young students, also from our university, engaged themselves against the demolition of this Baroque district and started to demonstrate and to activate the politics to protect the buildings and to renovate the buildings. This is this Baroque district I'm talking about, a very dense, very tiny and very interesting structure, but also in a very bad condition. So this was the beginning of the urban renewal program of Vienna, and this is very strongly related to social housing, because the principal idea of this program is that by renovating the districts and the old buildings, the inhabitants should not be moved out of the buildings. They should be able, also after renovation, to They should be able to pay the rent. They should be able to live in the environment they grew up or they lived before. And what you see in this slide now, this is a tool that the city of Vienna implemented, which is public and everybody can access to, where every building has its specific information. So with this urban renewal program that the Vienna started and later had even has been rewarded by the UNESCO, they also started with a very precise database of the existing building structures that the city of Vienna is consisting of. Nowadays, Spittelberg looks like this. You see a very beautiful environment, renovated old buildings, pedestrian zones, a lot of public activities in the public space. Some greenery, no parking. Pedestrians are having small markets, can access small markets in wintertime. So this was the kind of the birthplace of the renewal program as a part of the social housing strategy of Vienna. So this is something to read for you now. Vienna's social housing originated from an internationally acknowledged reform program in the 20s, which I will talk about later, and has developed for 80 years. And this 80 years, they resulted in a huge amount of apartments that are now under control, somehow under control of the city government in the amount of rent, in the height of the rent, and in the way how it is provided to the users or to the needs of the inhabitants. So this is a very important part of Vienna's housing policy, that nearly a quarter of the apartments of the city are under control of the city itself, and most of them are also owned by the city. Also in this time, they started with neighborhood councils that somehow provided information for the process of the renewal of the historic city, and also helped as well the house owners as well as the users or the people inhabiting the buildings, how to deal with this process of renovation and how to deal with the existing or with the offered fundings for the renovation of their units and of their buildings. This social or resident-oriented renewal strategy has been divided in a couple of different offices. They were run by architects, also in cooperation with social workers and also with construction engineers, and they provided a lot of information, a lot of interactivity between the different parts or parties that are involved in such a renewal process. And for this strategy, Europe's cities learned a lot from Vienna. This rehabilitation program, now at the end of this process, as you can see in the next slides, refurbished approximately 250,000 of apartments. That means over 7,000, 10,000 a year. And during the last decades, this really changed a lot the situation of the housing market in Vienna. Not only for the good, because this improvement in the quality of the apartments also increased the market prices for these apartments and somehow caused a segregation for those who couldn't afford this new situation and new market situation in the city of Vienna. When we look back again to the 70s, then we see in red those districts of the city that were under urgent need of renovation of their housing structure. And after a couple of decades, you see that most of it disappeared. Only a few red dots are left over. All the yellow districts, they somehow describe those parts of the city that already have been improved in a quite impressive way. To give you an impression about the situation of the housing situation of the, let's say, beginning or middle of 19th century, I would like to show you not only the urban fabric of this Gründerzeit, this developments of Vienna of the 1880s, 1850s, but also some floor plans and some pictures of the situation of the people, how the life circumstances have been in everyday life. So this is an aerial view of a representative Gründerzeit structure. That means a speculative housing development in the period of industrialization of Vienna. And this is an example of a floor plan in these blocks that have been built at that time. So each unit here is one house owned by a person or an institution and divided into a couple of very small apartments. Some of them only exist of kitchen and a small room. They shared toilets usually outside on the corridor, and they shared one staircase. You see very small courtyards, nearly no light in the inner rooms, no ventilation for the kitchens. So really difficult situations and circumstances for the people living at the time. And you can imagine 10, 15 people living in one of these 30 square meter apartments, sharing their bed, hardly able to heat their apartments with coal or wood. Yes, not a very pleasant situation. This density of the development at that time also caused, of course, not only the inappropriate sanitary conditions, but bad natural light and ventilation, and of course, a lack of public spaces and private spaces as well. As a result of this situation, after the First World War, where the situation really came out of control, a lot of informal settlements appeared around the city in the forests or in the countryside. And this was caused by the First World War, the result of the First World War, when many people, many Austrians living in the huge empire before came back to the capital. In this period of time, in between the two world wars, Vienna was ruled by a socialist party, and this party invested enormous amount of engagement and money in social housing projects. One of the most remarkable of them is the Karl Marx Hof. The Karl Marx Hof is a building 1 kilometer long and consists of more than 3,500 apartments, even nowadays. And as you can see here, there's a strong improvement in the quality of the floor plans. You have a bigger kitchen, you have a balcony, you have toilets, which is an important factor and didn't exist in the old situations of the 19th century. But you didn't have a bathroom and you didn't have a huge apartment. So the apartments still have been small. They had a much better sanitary condition, of course, but the bathrooms, for example, as the idea of the socialists at that time was to create a community atmosphere. They have been shared in the middle of the whole area. Also, the kitchens have been there to cook together, to have a bath together, to refresh together after work. So this was a political architecture, strongly influenced by the ideology of the socialists at that time. But they did a huge housing program, and they built a lot of these super blocks to provide housing for those people in desperate need after the First World War. I mentioned before that there was a lot of informal development around the city, and you see on the plan on the right side, this are the city boundaries of the city of Vienna. There are incredible amounts of informal developments, like in a city of the global south nowadays. So a very similar situation. And also the housing conditions have been very similar, caused by the extremely desperate situation of the inhabitants at that time, and the refugees coming to Vienna. In this circumstance, the Socialist Party also followed a strategy that was called settlers movement. Let's say an organization of those that inhabited land informally to organize themselves and to help them to improve the conditions of their houses and the conditions of their living circumstances, although they did it in a more or less informal way. In this atmosphere or in this circumstance, the architects also engaged very much in the social housing program, and Adolf Loos, which you might know as a world famous architect at that time, was the supervisor for this settlers movement. And he is also engaged in this example of small affordable housing that have been exhibited in this Werkbundsiedlung managed by Josef Frank in the 1930s. Also, you have to understand this as a complex situation of different strategies to solve the housing program in Vienna. On one hand, the superblock, and on the other hand, this settlers movement and these contributions of the architects to improve the housing situation. Nowadays, even more beautiful buildings because the green around is more dense and developed, and the whole settlement is very well renovated nowadays. And you see names of very many internationally well-known architects from that time, like Rietveld, Loos, and many others working on this project. So the opening came together with the world economic crisis in the late 20s, and the buildings couldn't be sold to the as the original plan was that from this exhibition the buildings should be sold to the new users. In this crisis situation, the city of Vienna had to overtake the buildings and to include it in the social housing program of Vienna. Coming back to the Gründerzeit and to the renewal program, I would like to point out that in this period of time in the 19th century, the housing quality in the urban structure of Vienna, in these densely organized blocks of the urban structure, have been very different, from very small and tiny apartments to huge apartments of a luxury family with bathroom, toilet, sometimes even 2 toilets, 2 bathrooms, and so on, have from the external the same appearance. They look the same. They have the same decorative facades with a lot of stucco and decorations and columns and figuration, but inside they offered a wide range of different possibilities. And also the section of these buildings is quite important because it was always a mixed-use building, somehow hosting facilities for small companies, for even light industry, shops, and always a contact or a dialogue between the street, the public space of the street, and the ground floor in these blocks, to provide the necessary space for all the economic activities, while in the upper floors, different housing units have been placed, and the people and sometimes even the owners lived in this house. These dense courtyards, as you can see them in the upper part of this picture, they, as I told you before, caused a lot of restrictions in light and ventilation for the housing situation in this historic context. And one of the strategies of the urban renewal was to open up the courtyards, to provide green space inside the courtyards, and also to open up a new pedestrian crossing possibility within this structure. This was a kind of exchange program, an exchange of volumes inside the blocks in exchange for the increase of the height of the surrounding structures by offering housing opportunities or offering housing units in the top floors of the old buildings. As you can see here, this is a very typical example for this period of renovation. You have terraces, you have a reduced height of the, we're talking about the same, sorry, doesn't work, about the same building here. Yeah, so there's a lack or a reduced height of the building by also offering a much better quality of the apartment. The same here, new courtyards, new use of the backyards, new buildings in the backyards. So this was really an impressive step forward in the quality of the historic situation. But not only the historic part of the city had to be changed and had to be adapted to the needs of the 21st century. Also, the city itself, the development of the city itself had to be planned and had to be readjusted. I will talk only a few words about the tools for it. This is mostly the strategic development plan of Vienna that includes a lot of specific topics and describes as a whole the strategies for the next 10 years of urban development. And I show a couple of examples that changed dramatically the situation of in Vienna, like the floodwater protection program of the Danube Island, which offers now a huge lake-like situation and recreational area in the city center of Vienna, as you can see in these pictures. So this was one of the public spaces that dramatically changed the situation in Vienna. And of course, the social housing that started in the 50s with this kind of south-oriented slabs of modernist projects and buildings, and continued over the decades into different scales and different proposals for social housing. This first one from the 50s or early 60s, as you can see, is a typology that offers smaller and bigger apartments, usually a ventilated and naturally lighted staircase, an elevator. Every apartment has a bathroom, has a kitchen, has a toilet. So the standards increased comparing to the period of time in between the two world wars, where the bathroom was not part of the social housing floor plan. And then the dimension of the projects became bigger and bigger. In the 70s, 80s, the city of Vienna built up to 3,000, 3,500 apartments in one project, but also added facilities like kindergartens, swimming pools, rooftop terraces, and things like that in quite massive constructions. But they up to nowadays still provide a huge satisfaction for those living in these complexes. So this is a project of Alt Erla, a very famous social housing project in Vienna that offers a swimming pool on the top, also tennis as indoor swimming pool here in this wide basis of the pyramid kind of structure of the first floors. Community spaces like, for example, gymnastic rooms or workshop spaces and so on in this central part, also parking. And all the apartments had, of course, a terrace. They had, of course, a small garden or a small planting area on the balcony. And a variety of typologies within these structures of 4 to 1 room apartments for bigger families, for singles. So quite a mix of users within the building. As I told you, about 3,200 apartments, 9,000 inhabitants, and all built by one architect. This, although a very successful project and still providing a good quality of life, caused a lot of critics by other architects, that one office is doing such a huge project while the others are not able to contribute with their ideas, with their proposals. And this was somehow a change in the policy of Vienna, coming also from this renewal strategy in the historic context of the city. So now the dimensions of the project changed, and also the let's say the involvement of players changed in the development of social housing. These institutions that I mentioned before that help to manage the conflicts between the owners and the people that rent the apartments and the store owners in the district, they extended their activity also into new developments. And on the same time, there was a procedure embedded in the process of social housing that was called housing developers competitions. That means, I'm sure you can read this text while I'm talking, so I'm not going into detail of that. But to explain the circumstances, these competitions included not longer anymore like before in this huge project that we saw with the swimming pools on top, only an architectural competition, but also a construction developer, a developer that guaranteed the costs, that guaranteed the quality of the building, and the architect that guaranteed the quality of the floor plans, the quality of the project, of the architecture. So these two players, they had to work together and they had to apply together in a competition. And this was a huge step forward to improve the quality of social housing in Vienna, but also to reduce the scale of the housing projects that have been developed in these years. And this is a project I just show you because it's a very impressive one. It is a project that is a kind of mixture of a renewal project and a development, a social housing development at the same time. This was a gas tank decoration, what we saw before. And in the 90s, Jean Nouvel, Coop Himmelblau, architect Wedon and Holzbauer, two very famous Austrian players, they converted these decorative brick walls of these former gas tanks into social housing units. And they also started the development of a whole new district of Vienna by this core project, this initiative that started the transformation process of an industrial area into a housing development and housing district. These are some pictures of this proposal. You see the outer brick walls are still existing. Some oriented their project, this one is shown well, to the inside, to the courtyard of the projects. One did it in the other way, oriented the apartments to the outside. So you have different approaches. There is a shopping mall in this project, integrated a music, a concert hall for about 3,000 people. A lot of interesting contributions, and not all of them worked. Some had to be changed. The shopping mall became a music city. And nowadays, with the densification of the surrounding, I think the whole situation there stabilized a little. In this process of transforming former industrial areas into social housing developments, one remarkable project is a former cable factory. And I just want to give you a visual impression of this colorful development that also included the future inhabitants in the design process. It was the first participatory design process in Vienna, where a social housing development included the future residents to contribute with their ideas and their proposals in the development. Nevertheless, it became in some parts a quite dense structure, as you can see here in this part of the project. But I think it's never depressive or never frightening by its colorful appearance and the open spaces that are provided. It's a quite successful project and proposal in this social housing of the 21st century. Here we see the floor, or some of the floor plans that are offered within this unit. They also have, they also offer terraces, balconies, of course, some of them over 2 levels, kind of 2-story building within a social housing project. Small units and really interesting configurations over even 3 floors in row houses and so on. So a huge variety of possibilities. Some of you might have known or heard about a European competition for young architects. It's called Europan, where many European cities participate by offering sites to young architects and young studios to contribute with their proposals. One of them was Vienna, and they offered this site in the outskirts of Vienna. You see also already single family houses around. This is the, let's say, the last part of the consolidated city. In this part where density becomes lower and urban structure becomes more suburban structure. In this surrounding, this studio UEK proposed this project. The specific quality of this project was that one of the first that offered the roof as a second public or semi-public space for the inhabitants or for the residents of this building. And as you can see, although some parts of this urban master plan have been given to different architects to design finally the project, as you can see here. So this was one studio, this and this another. They had to agree and they had to cooperate on the design of the public space. Usually they do it on the ground floor in the courtyards, as you can see here. But in this case, they also had to do it on the rooftop. And these are some other examples of floor plans that we have in this this project. But what is more interesting than the floor plans, because they are similar due to restrictions and regulations in all social housing projects in Vienna, what is more important is this second connectivity and network on the rooftop and these open spaces that are offered on the roof of the buildings, like grill terraces, sun desks, and so on, and always connected with the vertical elements, the staircases, elevators in all the buildings. Also, they are managed by different companies and designed by different architects. I think this is a remarkable step forward in the development of social housing in Vienna. Some impressions of this project. The bridges, you see also some pictures from inside, because one of the studios is a friend of mine, and so I have access to a lot of material. You see within the studios or within the apartments, you sometimes have double ceiling heights. You have communication space or some benches in front of the apartment doors so that the neighbors can communicate with each other. And this is the view from the top to this Oasis 22, that was the name of the project, where you can walk along all these green spaces and open roof terraces from one house to the other. An important second project in social housing is this. This is important because of the way they dealt with the public space. They condensed the development of the housing projects along the boundaries of the development area and kept the central area free as a wilderness to become a kind of central garden or central park for this housing development. This is still in the scale of an urban master plan, so I will jump through it very quickly, but just to show you a little bit the connectivity between the city around, the consolidated structure of the city, and this inner open space that is becoming a kind of public park for the whole neighborhood, not only for the development area itself. This was an interesting contribution, and now it's under development. So we see the first buildings rising up here in the near future. The last project, huge development project I will talk about, is the Seestadt Aspern. I talk about it in many different ways, and because it's an urban development, but it's also, I'm sorry, this is not, it's also a very large social housing development, and it's offering up to 20,000 for up to 20,000 inhabitants, new accommodation, new residential districts. It's a satellite city, and it's a concentrated, or let's say a circular structure that is the main access road. There is a lake or a recreational area also here in the kernel of the development. Different layers of public spaces with different qualities, and let's say affordable but middle class social housing development in the outskirts of Vienna, which has one remarkable extra or specific condition. In this case, they built the subway to this development before they started building the first house. So when the first projects have been built there was already the public transport infrastructure in the best available quality on this site. This is, of course, a big advantage for the people moving into this kind of outskirts or satellite cities, because the connectivity to the city and the traffic situation is always an urgent topic in these developments. You see it's still under construction. we are now in the phase 4. I think this was phase 1, this was phase 2, this is phase 3, and now we are going phase 4. It will last a couple of years more till it's finished, and we will see how it develops in the future in the south, because this is an old factory of General Motors, a car manufacturer, and will disappear sooner or later. So maybe the subway will be lengthened to the south, and the structure will change in this part of the city very fast and very dramatically. At the very end of my presentation, I would like to go back a step to the scale of social housing. This was an urban design competition I participated in together with König Lach as a proposal for a sorry, this was a mistake, as a proposal for development along a train track. This is a cargo train track in the outskirts of Vienna. And our proposal was to somehow build a kind of protection or protective object along this rail track, and to create a more silent and more, let's say, enclosed inner space, a courtyard kind of situation for kindergarten, playgrounds, and some other housing units. As in all these urban master plans, a part of the planning area is is developed by the winning office. So that was this part here, and some other objects within this master plan are further developed by other architectural offices. As a result of this developer competition processes that I mentioned before. So the urban master plan is the first step, and then in the frame of the master plan or the urban design, you have to compete together with this developer as an architect with your proposal for some segments of this master plan. And this was this wall that faces the train tracks and is somehow protecting the inner circulation, but also the apartments from the noise of these tracks, and offering some emergency staircases as well. Storage rooms are behind these wooden boxes. The other side is more open, is oriented to playgrounds, to basketball fields, has sliding sun protections in front of the balconies, and some small gardens in the ground floor. So this is the standard of social housing in, let's say, in a better quality in Vienna nowadays. Also, these projects offer a lot of different apartments that are accessible by this inner circulation area. You have a widening of the corridors for bicycles and Kinderwagen and all these kind of equipments you nowadays have to bring close to your apartment for charging the bicycle accumulators or whatever. So this is changing. There are also storage rooms for bicycles to change, also to help to change the model split and to avoid the use of cars in the city. Also here you see the trains outside, the cargo trains. The staircases are always with natural light. They are colorful. They try to be as friendly as possible for the residents and the users. There are always some spaces where people can come together, where they can meet. They can have a party together, or they can just sit and have a talk. There are some rooms available for the community of the residents to be occupied with their special interests. So that's a result of the discussion of the community itself. Also, the apartments are always with open kitchen or closed kitchen, depending on the wishes of the the residents, but they have usually light from two sides, and this is a quality that is becoming more and more important now in the layout of the floor plans of social housing. So when we have a look here, you have all these semi-public or more private installations. There is also a kitchen for a party facility, the staircase. This is the kindergarten for 3 groups with the playgrounds in front, always private terraces or loggias for all the apartments facing west or south. You see the bicycle storage rooms and many other, garbage, of course, many other facilities that are necessary for social housing competitions to succeed in nowadays. This is one of the upper floors. The typology of the apartments is, of course, similar, but has varieties in the sizes, the amount of rooms. And here you see these storage rooms, the wooden boxes that are facing the train tracks as well. Some sections you see not a lot of garage underground, yeah, only a small part of the building has parking underground, so by far not enough for all the residents. But this is a political decision not to provide too much parking, to make people use more bicycles and public transport, to change the model split. Here is the area of these boxes, the train tracks that are somehow the enemy of this development. When we look into a detail of one of these apartments, for example, you see that this is this internal corridor with the storage boxes. There is always a gap between the corridor and the windows of the kitchen, so that people cannot directly walk here along and look into the kitchen. There is a widening for the entrance, that you can put the kinderwagen or the bicycle in front of your apartment door. Then you have a storage room inside, a small one. You have a bathroom, usually with a bath tube, at least when you have more than one sleeping room, the master bedroom, a separated toilet, a children's bedroom, and a living room. Terrace, balcony, and loggia in the west side. So this is somehow the typology of social housing nowadays in Vienna. And with this last details, I would like to say thank you and welcome in Vienna. It means a bit a virtual welcome, but I hope we will have a successful semester and a lot of interesting discussions about social housing in Vienna. Thank you very much.
Hello, Professor. May I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes, thank you. My name is Arum. It's nice to meet you even virtually. So I have a question about the concept that reducing the building height to provide better quality, like you said before. So my question is, the reducing height building must be reduced the number of units too. Where are the people living there moved to? Is there any addition in another area for them? I think
this
it's
is
my question. Thank you.
This is one question, and it's a good question, because this is, of course, a main discussion. So when you do a renovation of a historic building, that on first hand, not all the apartments are always occupied because of the bad conditions. So sometimes you have empty apartments and you can somehow manage to remove some residents from one to another. And the second is that when you reduce the density of the courtyards to increase the ventilation and the light, to improve the light situation of the existing building, then you can add a store or two in the height of the boundaries of the block, so that you have a kind of equivalent of the floor square meters as a whole of the project, but you reduce it in the inner part and you increase it in the boundaries. Could I answer your question, Arum?
Yes, yes, Professor. Thank you. So it's like when you reduce the fifth story maybe, and then in upper of the fifth storage, it's at the units. Is that true?
Yes, you have additional units in the additional floor, and you reduce units in the courtyard.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Markus, maybe I just want to add, what about the construction problem when you add some of the space on top of the existing one?
Yeah. The historic structures are relatively stable. They are built of massive bricks with thick walls, and in many cases it is sufficient for the to increase with one light wooden floor construction, but in many cases it's also necessary to improve the stability of the building by especially increasing the ability of the foundation. This is the weakest point in these historic buildings, and but there's concrete injections and things like that that help to solve this problem.
There's a retrofitted, especially on foundation, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This question, if the pandemic had changed the situation, especially the spatial and architectural situation, I wouldn't say it already has, but I think it will. I think that the discussion that is now going on since a year approximately about the need of open space within the apartments or close to apartments, the need of green space, the accessibility of green space. So this is a discussion that became massive in the last 2 years, or especially in the last year. And I think this will change the design and as well the spatial design and the architectural design in the future. But as the projects that are now under construction have been planned long before the pandemic, you cannot see it now as a result. In general, I would say that the balcony, the terrace, this private open space in a direct relation to the apartment became more important even since a couple of years. So there was a change in the law, in the building regulations in Vienna. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember. Maybe Nariman knows better. But it was the change that you are allowed now to have a balcony on a facade that is facing public space. This was prohibited before in Vienna. I can't tell you why. It was a regulation that might be caused by the fact that they wanted to avoid things falling down from balconies and harm people on the sidewalk, or it had some political reasons to avoid illegal demonstrations on balconies or whatever. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure, but I know now that this is possible again, and this is something that people really ask for. So when you look at the housing market, the one of the most important things that people want when they are looking for a new apartment is a balcony or a terrace.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting about the social housing and how the building can provide good facilities, good qualities. And I wonder about the funding aspect. Can you tell us where the funding resource from? Is it just from the government or there are any resources? Thank you, sir.
This is from the government, but the funding is not working anymore because it was the strategy, and in this period of time when they started the renovation process was to help the annuities, the revenue of the loans that you need to do the renovation to reduce. So the government helped you to get cheap money. And for this cheap money, they had some requirements. And these requirements were the urban situation, the quality of the buildings, the respect of for the residents, and these kind of things. This was working very well when the interest rate was high. So when you had 6, 8, 10, 12% interest rate, then any help to reduce this is appreciated. Nowadays, we have very, very low interest rates of nearly 0%. So this is not attractive anymore. The tool that the city developed to handle this renovation process is not working under the economic situation nowadays. But thanks God, the renovation process is mostly done and finished. And so the time window the city had to install these tools was a good one and a very helpful one for the city. Now we have to think about other tools, like additional floor space or any other benefits for the investors to respect and to follow the needs of the city and the public agenda.
Okay, good afternoon, Professor Markus from Indonesia. I have one question. Why do most buildings in Europe, from what I've seen, including those you have showed us, not have a small canopy above the window? I know it has something to do with the climate, but how do the sun and the rain affect those buildings? Because I'm comparing it to Indonesia. We do have a small canopy above the window or any other kind of sun shading thing due to our tropical climate. Thank you.
You're welcome. This is slowly becoming a topic. By the global warming, caused by the global warming. And in historic pictures of European cities, you see a lot of them. So there was a period of time where people and architects didn't pay attention on that. Maybe influenced by the formal approach of modernism. But I'm not sure about that. But this clean facades, this lack of decoration, this straight, slim architecture was a fashion that somehow didn't make it easy to deal with very important topics like sun exposure, rain exposure, and so on. I think that is changing now. The global warming is one aspect, but also the architectural fashion is slightly changing. And we see more and more, like we saw in the last project I showed you, these sliding walls that are a sun protection that you can move along the balcony wherever you want it and have a kind of semi-translucent, semi-transparent buffer zone between the window and the fence of the balcony. These elements are becoming more and more. And we also have building regulations now and regulations in the law about rental issues, that it is necessary to allow the residents and the users of buildings to apply, for example, sun shading elements outside the windows. At the moment, up to now, it was only possible to do it inside or in between the windows, because every element you put outside is changing the facade, and by that part of an application process in the building institutions, in the building regulation process. So this changed, and this is a slowly starting process, and I think we will see the effects in a couple of years.
So they're still developing the right solution, right?
Yes, and it's a permanent process of adjusting, of discussing. One huge topic, for example, nowadays is also the air conditioning. In many countries in the world, air conditioning of residential buildings or apartments is normal. In Austria, it's not. We have a huge amount of apartments without air conditioning. We have central heating, which is, would say, standard, but air conditioning is not. So when people want nowadays, by these global heating processes that are influencing our cities, they want to retrofit the apartments and to improve the quality inside by installing an air conditioner, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to put these split elements that you all know, these huge vents on the facade, when this facade is facing public space. And they are not allowed to put these elements on the facade if the facade is showing or is facing another building. And the people there could intervene and say, no, we don't want that. It's too loud, it's too ugly, it's too whatever. So there are discussions going on, up to court decisions nowadays, about these processes of adjusting the infrastructure and the facilities of the city to the changing environmental situation. It's a permanent process.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Such a very interesting presentation. And I really interested in the one of the example of social housing, when the residents participate in the planning of the house. As we know that residents live there, so they know what they need. They participate in the planning. Maybe will produce better housing for them. But my question is, the resident must have a different requirements for them to live. How the developer or the developer for the housing bring the solution for the many requirements from the residents. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think it has two, let's say, two paths. One path are the regulations. Many things are defined by law, by the building regulations, by technical standards and these kind of things. So this is one aspect. And the other aspect is the individual needs of the future residents. And this is very difficult because usually in a social housing process, the architects and the developers don't know them. They don't know the future residents. So we have a second strategy nowadays in the housing development in Vienna, which is not a huge segment of the market, but still it's becoming more and more important. It's called Baugruppen, or that these are, let's say, these are groups of people that join, and then they start the process of the developing of the building they will in the future live in. And this is of course, this is not organized by law or by a procedure, a standard procedure. This is something that happens by individual initiatives, but it's happened more and more often. And already in the city planning process, there are some parts in many urban developments that are just reserved for these kind of groups that are looking for a piece of land, they are looking for an architect, they are looking for a developer, and then they contribute in the process of the development of the building, the design, the architectural layout, with their wishes and with their group strategy, how they want to organize their life. So I think I also agree with you that the participation is a very important aspect in urban planning as well as in architecture. But we have to be careful that we are not only listening to those that are loud. In many of these participative processes, the most important thing is also to hear the voices of those that are not able to make them to express themselves. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's something happening in all social processes, that there are some people more in the foreground and others more in the background. But at the end, they all participate in the same development, and so we should act in a way that also gives those that are not so present and not so expressive a voice and make them be heard. I think that's important.
I think listen their voice, but it doesn't mean that if we listen, we do decided what they want to ask, right? So there is another, yeah, another
in many
process.
cases, in many cases, it's not even possible because they are totally controversial. Yeah? So yeah, the interest of one group is totally different to the interest of another elderly family with children or whatever. Yeah, you have many social aspects that need a meditation or that need a mentoring from the architect to be dealt with.
So compromising is also one case strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
I want to ask something about maybe it's about the participant, about the inhabited people. Is there any cases that maybe the inhabited don't want to move to the new social housing? They refuse to replace to the new housing. Is there any something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then how you respond for this case?
If possible, they can stay in their unrenovated apartments, and all the rest of the house will be renovated. So this is you have to separate two kinds of retrofitting or renovation. One is the building as a whole, which is another kind of process, and one is segmented in apartments, individual spaces, and public or semi-public spaces like staircases, installations, infrastructure in the building, roofs, and so on. So in many cases, I think in Vienna, it happened that most of the building has been renovated. Even the rooftop has been extended to new apartments, but one or two apartments remained in the old way, because the people, mostly elderly people or very poor people, were not interested and were afraid of changing something in their personal environment. So that happens. And if somehow possible, these social workers and architects that help to and developers and the residents to come together and to talk with each other, they try to manage these kind of situations. So there are sociologists also involved, not architects, to deal with these problems, but it's a tolerance in the process, because you can renovate this apartment a couple of years later too. Although of course the life circumstances for these people during the construction process is not so easy. It's dusty, it's loud, and so that's why not many of them refused to integrate their apartment in the whole process.
Okay, thank you, sir. And then what the most challenging process that you have been faced during the social housing program?
Nowadays,
Yes.
I think nowadays it's the price. I think the most difficult aspect at the moment is that we have so high prices of land and construction that we cannot reach the limits anymore. This is this concrete gold that is widely known as a result of money that needs investment or is searching for investment, is pushing up real estate prices. And this is the prices of land and the prices of constructions. And so under this aspect, I think this is the most urgent, the most problematic topic at the moment. Maybe side by side with the fact that more and more apartments remain empty, unused, because they are bought to store money and not to make business by renting them out.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.